All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shayla Metzger, and on behalf of our team at Carahsoft, I would like to welcome you to our Quokka webinar, Can Mobile Security and Privacy Coexist? At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Chris Gogol, VP and GM of Public Sector at Quokka. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shaylin. And thank you, Carahsoft, for hosting this event with us today. It's been a great partnership so far with Carahsoft, and we're excited as we move forward, offering our solutions through Carahsoft, as Shaylin said, to the federal, state, and local and education community. So today we're going to talk a little bit about mobile security, a topic that doesn't get too much attention often in conversations at the CIO, CISO level. And we think strongly that it's a topic that deserves more attention, and hopefully we'll show you why today. And to do that, we'll take a look at some of the upcoming and top risks that we see in the mobile space, and how they can impact not only your work life in terms of your work data, things you do on your phone for work, but also your personal life. Because as we know, whether it's a bring your own device, corporate owned, personally enabled, or even a fully managed device that you work with in your workplace in the government, those personal apps and work apps are existing on that same phone. So even if there's a big wall between them, it's still getting carried around with you every day, and it's still the same person interacting with them. So we're going to explore a little bit both on the work side and the personal side, those different types of risks that might appear, and hopefully educate you all a little bit about some of those mobile risks so you can be armed in your conversations in your work lives to talk about this topic and importantly raise it up the attention that is on it. So with that, we'll get started and jump in here. I'm Chris Gogol, VP at Quokka for their public sector. I've been with the company for about 10 years now, and have worked with a ton of our federal government customers, including US CISA and Department of Defense customers, to integrate this technology into their everyday work lives and helping protect those government devices and government applications that are used throughout our federal infrastructure. So quick topics here today, threats and how to find them. We'll talk a little bit through some of those lessons learned for options for remediating those threats as well, coming from some of that experience working with our federal customers. And then, of course, we'll talk about a little bit about Quokka at the end and why government agencies are leveraging our solutions to solve these problems. So real quick, we're going to dive right in to a couple different types of applications. So these are the types of apps that we see out there. And the first one here is harvester applications. There's a couple different metrics here for each one, and we'll start with the attack process. So for harvester applications, there's not a really complex attack process. You don't have to go break into a complicated network, get a foothold on the router, flip over past the firewall, and get access to data. With mobile applications today, most of that data that we're accessing for work and personal lives, lives in an application that accesses a cloud resource. So think about your files, Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, SharePoint, whatever it is. Most often now, you'll access that file or that resource directly from your application on your device, rather than logging into a VPN, going to a central network, and accessing that data that's siloed there. So what does that mean for attackers? They don't have to break into your network. They can just build an application that gets access to the data directly on that endpoint device. So what's the attack process here? Very simple. Build an interesting or useful app. Ask users for their data, and then of course profit, because on the Android and Apple platforms, the end arbiter for that access to that sensitive data, whether that's the file system, the contact list, the calendar, all of that data is locked behind those permissions. And all I have to do is build something that gets people interested and ask them for that data. So it's a very simple attack process. And of course, some of the advantages there in the middle, it's easy to do relatively. There's not a complex attack system or attack chain, kill chain that you have to do. Two, it's legal. There's no real legal basis for saying you can't ask for my photos, my contact list, my calendar. And of course, there's a potential for mass data collection across, hundreds, thousands, millions of users if this application becomes popular. And on top of that, what's a better way to understand, an attack surface for a spear phishing campaign than to, collect data from the users directly? So you can think of, everyone's favorite example, TikTok. Well, what does it know about you? It knows what you're interested in, it knows what you like to eat, knows who you know. And with all that input, you can see how it might be easy for an attacker who's doing a spear phishing campaign to say, all right, I'm going to target Chris because I know he loves Korean barbecue and he always goes there with his friend Nico. So I can, message Chris pretending I'm him, offering a coupon for that or a date for that location, that Korean barbecue restaurant. With that data that you gain, even from the personal applications, it becomes a lot easier to then use in a more targeted attack as well across an enterprise or government as well. So what's an example? We talked about TikTok, of course, but we'll take a look at how we find other harvesters, because of course TikTok's not the only one, it's just the most prolific one in the news. So the way that we can detect them is through a few different approaches. One is dynamic analysis, analyzing an application as it's running. And then the second is behavioral profiling. So as it's running, what is the application doing? So beyond asking for my contact list, what does it actually do with it? That's a question that a lot of people don't ask when they look at an application. They assume that it's used for a certain purpose, of course, but what does the application actually do with that data? So by leveraging that dynamic analysis, running the application, and doing behavioral profiling how that data is being used, we can understand how an application might be harvesting data from there. So in order to do that, you need a few features in the modern, mobile ecosystem. Well, one, if you want to do it across, any of the 10,000, 100,000 applications that are installed across a given government network, well, you need it to be automated, because trying to detect one by one every update of every app isn't feasible, really. So you need an automated system that can perform these types of analysis. Two, you need to be able to actually run the application. So a lot of the modern day applications, if you're a developer, you'll know, include things like RASP, runtime app security protection, and different methods to try to detect when your application is in a environment that's being monitored, like an analysis environment. So if you don't have the right tools to defeat those RASPs or defeat that pinning, network pinning, then it's going to be hard or even impossible to analyze that application. So those are a couple attributes there that are needed for this type of system. And of course, by monitoring the application as it's running, you don't have any false positives because you observe the behavior. If it's sending the data to a specific place, well, you saw it send that data and captured it. So some benefits there. And when we look at privileged applications, these are applications that are already in a privileged state as they come on your device, and that's because the supply chain for devices, especially, is very complex. So it includes not only the manufacturer that you buy the thing from, or the telco provider that you buy the thing from, Verizon, T-Mobile, or Samsung for your manufacturer, or Asus. It includes everyone below that as well. So who makes the chipset? Is it a Qualcomm chipset? Is it a MediaTek chipset, Unisoc, or some other manufacturer that we don't know? Where did they get the camera from? The GPS module, all of these things. So all these different parts of the supply chain add apps, what are called system applications, to devices to interact with those different pieces. So, the chipset needs its own application. The camera needs its own application. And before they get delivered to you and get in your hand, those applications are already pre-installed on the device, and they're pre-installed at a privileged level. That means they have a lot more access to your device beyond an application that you would install from the App Store per se. So what we've observed in the past is these privileged applications have the serious potential to be malicious because even the manufacturer themselves, they don't control or have visibility into that supply chain completely. So they might be deploying applications that get added that they don't have any control over or insight into. So the advantages here, the attack process is, one, insert your code during the supply chain. So wherever in that complex supply chain, you can get your code on that device, get your app on that device. You can insert it, and then since you're already at that privilege level, at that trusted layer below the operating system, really you can still then passively collect, or wait and deploy collection agents on the device without oversight from the normal security mechanisms on devices. So some advantages of that, of course, you have, by operating that lower level, you have persistence. You have the potential for complete data compromise, not only one application's data or one type of data, but potentially all of the data on the device. You have the potential for pivoting and adding new capabilities over time. It's harder to detect. And of course, as I mentioned, it subverts the operating system protection and detection mechanisms because they're looking at everything that's installed on top of them, but things that are installed below already are assumed to be safe and assumed to be trusted, and in many cases wrongly. So how do we detect things like this? There's an example on the right-hand side of a very, very prolific one that came out a few years back, which we discovered. And it was a US manufacturer called Blue, BLU, based in Florida, that had a complex supply chain in China to manufacture cheap Android smartphones. And actually, it was the #1 selling phone on Amazon at the time with an Amazon Prime logo on it. So it wasn't just some, off nowhere, no one bought it, type of small, cheap device. It was a very popular device with a major US brand behind it. And what did we find? By analyzing these privileged applications, we found one of them sitting at that lower level was sending data every 72 hours back to a Chinese server, including logs of the GPS location where that user's been, logs of text messages that the user had been sending or receiving, and the ability then to, what I mentioned in that previous slide, pivot or add new capabilities, search across the device for specific keywords for specific people, add a new collection capability, let's say screenshots or audio. All of this through that supply chain added on a major US distribution network, Amazon, branded by their brand. So this type of threat isn't just something that we think is out there. We know it's out there because we found it. And this actually was on the front page of the New York Times a few years back. So how do we find this? With flow-based vulnerability scanning. So again, automation is key for this because typically there'll be somewhere between 100 and 150 pre-installed applications or privileged applications that come preloaded on a device. So you need to be able to efficiently scan all of them. And you need to have an approach that can, one, identify these true zero-day vulnerabilities. So not only look for a weakness, but look for a vulnerability that has a valid attack chain with it. So there's some technology that we created and presented at Usenix 2020, which we leveraged to define these 0 days in these privileged applications. And to date, about over 250 vulnerabilities discovered and published as CVEs. We wanted to note as well, we'll be presenting on a few more of these privileged vulnerabilities at DEF CON just in a week or two's time at the end of Black Hat there. So if you're going to be out there in Las Vegas, be sure to stick around until Friday. We'll be presenting at DEF CON then on some new vulnerabilities similar to the one on the right-hand side there. So let's look at some examples now. We talked about harvester apps. We talked about privileged apps. What's an example of a harvester app that you haven't seen before, potentially? Well, this one here, Cam Scanner. So if you in a work environment or a personal environment, you might get a business card in an event. You might get a document that you need to scan into your device. What's the easiest way to do that now that no one has a printer scanner at home? Well, it's just to use your phone and download an app to scan it in. And let's say I'm on my iPhone here and I search for scanner in the App Store. Well, below the ad that everyone ignores, the first real result you get is an app called Cam Scanner. And you see it's got 1.3 million ratings, 5 stars, very highly rated, number 20 something in productivity for the whole App Store. And typically as a modern day user of a phone, I'll just hit my gold mine. I don't have to look any further. I'll just download it, install it. It's got great reviews. A ton of people use it. it must be trustworthy, right? Well, let's take a look deeper. So when we look at this application in a view of our console here, one of our Quokka products, we see, the application, obviously. We see a score, a threat score, 100 out of 100. And then we see a list of important risk findings. Well, there's a lot of things there that you might expect, like, hey, it accesses my camera, of course. But there's a lot of things there that you might not expect, like it's using hard-coded credentials for encryption. Oh, and the one near the bottom there communicates with high-risk locations. Let's take a look at that. So we'll dive in a level deeper. So what is it actually doing with that data that I'm scanning into my phone, that business card or that document for work or home? Well, these are the locations it's sending the data when you use the app. And you can see the number of different connections there in China where this data is going and the different URLs. So this is what I mean by doing behavioral analysis. When I actually install that application, when I run it, what's happening to my data? And this is something that we don't have visibility on today through the app stores. We don't have visibility on, it's not being filtered out for us. So we have to do that detection. We have to discover what's happening with our data in order to protect ourselves. So, and by the way, if you might think you're protected under a privacy policy. So, hey, it might send it there, but it's not going to share it with anyone else. Well, if we look at their privacy policy on their website, directly linked from the store, we see the clause in here for things that are scanned by our tool, we will collect the documents or images which you upload when you sync files. When you use our services to convert documents into multiple formats, we will collect the documents you choose to upload. So again, this type of language here makes it abundantly clear that as you are scanning things in with this application, your data is out of your hands. It's now theirs, and it's going directly to a place where you don't want it to go. Another just quick note there: if you search for the developer, that's their website. So they're not trying to be subversive about this. They're not trying to hide where this data is going. But because the modern state of mobile security, no one's thinking about these things. These harvester applications can operate in plain sight without us being aware, and without even today government agencies having requirements to actually scan and look for these things. Many government agencies are doing it because they need to, and they recognize they need to, but there's not actually today a requirement to do that. And you can think how scary that is when we think about how much data is held on our mobile phones, both on our work lives, but also on our personal lives, because those aren't two separate things. They cross over. So it's important to think about these types of threats and to invest in tools that can help you find them efficiently, especially in your workplace. So we'll take a look at a different type of application here. Now, we think about the harvester apps as something that's potentially blatantly bad, doing something bad on purpose. But there's also good apps behaving badly that we have to think about here. So not all software is developed securely. So as we're adding applications to our device, especially applications that access sensitive data, like my call log or my SMS messages, it should be checked to ensure that application actually handles my data securely. Whether or not it means to do something bad with it, it can still accidentally cause issues. So we'll take a look at an example here on the Android platform this time with the Caller ID app. Again, something meant to protect you, about 10 million downloads, 4.3 star rating, so fairly well rated. And we'll look at that next level down again in Quokka's platform. So we see something here on the bottom, again, which we don't want to see. Application programmatically leaks data. Well, it doesn't sound good. So let's take a look deeper. So through software-defined paths, meaning it's happening, it's coded to happen in some way. The application is leaking my data, and it violates a few different regulations there, including some OWASP guidance and GDPR guidance for handling private personal data. So if we look at a level deeper, open up and dig down again, as security analysts like to do, we can actually look at what the tool found, in the code. So we see, the source in this case is a Java class where it's accessing our SMS data, and the sink there is the log. So what that means is data that's coming from our SMS is reaching the log. So it's coming from a secure and protected place to an insecure, unprotected place. And we can see that not only with our flow-based vulnerability scanner that I talked about, but we can confirm it then with the dynamic analysis. So as we observe the app running, we can actually look for this vulnerability that we detected already. And we do see, a log message there as the app is running, including our phone number and generic text message content. So again, what does this mean? This developer likely didn't mean to do this. It's probably left in there from development, a debug a piece of code to check and see if things were working correctly. But with the rapid pace of development these days and the need to keep pushing new updates and new features, things like this often get left behind, even in very popular applications. So not only do we have to think about the applications that we use, but if I'm a developer now in a government, state and local education environment, how can I make sure that my app's not doing this as well and exposing data? So our tools can be used in kind of both ways. You can either look at it from a IT security perspective and see, is my software, are my app endpoints on my device safe? And for our developers out there, finding and securing and hardening my application before it gets into my users' hands is also critical. So now we're going to look at some options for remediation. So if you're in that IT security space, you're managing a mobility fleet, you may have an MDM, mobile threat defense, different tools to help you, find and fix threats. Well, if you have this tool as well, or a tool like this that allows you to find those new threats, those zero-day threats, those harvester apps, those privileged apps, well, what can you do when I say I see cam scanner on a device in my network? Well, you have a couple different options here. You can simply ban the application. Through tools like ours, we can instruct your MDM to automatically add that app to your block list of apps. So you can leverage that intelligence directly back in your existing tools to then remediate that threat. But of course, in all scenarios, that might not be appropriate. So a couple different options there. You can update your network defense. So when we see that list of domain names, list of IP addresses where that data is going, we can choose to then feed that data into our network defense to block those connections from happening on the device if I have a VPN or firewall set on my mobile devices. In a lot of cases, the simplest and most effective way can be to warn the users, that third option there. So as I said and walked through with the cam scanner example, this is just something that's not commonly thought about these days because we trust people like Apple to scan and protect us. And hey, I've got an iPhone, I'm safe. But users need to be aware that as you're granting these permissions, as you're giving access to your data and your company's data with these apps, there are threats out there, even blatantly in the wild, where these applications are just harvesting information or accidentally leaking information. So making users aware of these threats is an extremely important point to help them, protect you by making smarter decisions about what they install and use. And then, of course, we have the option to report it to the vendor. So Quokka obviously does this a decent amount here with our list of CVEs that we've reported back to vendors. And if you are a user of Quokka services and you're finding things with our tools that you want fixed, or you want, you would like the vendor to know about, you can always feel free to coordinate through us, and we can reach out to the vendor on your behalf to represent yourself and ensure that the issue is both reported and hopefully fixed with them as well. So how do we do this? We're going to talk a little bit about why the government is using our tools now. Well, I mentioned a few of these different capabilities in our analysis throughout the presentation so far. I mentioned the dynamic analysis, the code path vulnerability scanning, the looking for 0 days vulnerabilities, but there's a ton of different capabilities. We've published about 11 different academic papers describing these capabilities. So it's not like a white paper that you just have to believe us that was that the thing is good, but it actually went through the peer review process for most of these capabilities. So you can actually look in depth about the approach, how it compared to prior art out there, to see how it compares out there. But really, we have a set of tools that breaks down into three categories. It's our core engines, which covers a lot of that standard type of app vetting use case, which you might see out there. Looking at insecure hash, looking at those hard-coded encryption keys, coverage for OWASP, that sort of thing. But we also then have our advanced and next-gen capabilities. So the 0-day vulnerabilities, that flow-based vulnerability tracker that we found the Amazon Blue phone vulnerability with, that we're finding vulnerabilities with that we're presenting at DEF CON. All of that falls into our advanced category and allows you to find those true 0 days in applications, not just weaknesses, but true 0-day vulnerabilities. There's also a capability in our advanced suite called, it focuses on app collusion. So like privileged applications that run at a lower level than the operating system and can then have wider access. Well, there's another way to subvert the operating system's guidance, and that is to collude with other applications. So let's say I have one app that is accessing my contact data and another app that's sending it over the network, or it has the capability to send data over the network. If I look at one app and the second app in isolation, it doesn't appear to be anything wrong because this one's using my contact data, this one's doing some network connections. But if those apps then start talking to each other, then I have a problem. So this is an engine that's focused on discovering these types of issues. And this is something we've also seen out there in the wild. And again, a downside to this for users is that communication between those applications isn't monitored by your operating system. So, hey, if I grant this one app my calendar, it might be being used by 2 or 3 other applications without my knowledge. It's not showing up on my privacy dashboard. I didn't grant it to them, but this app is sharing data with another app. So that's something that we're very interested in exploring further and have some capabilities today. And then, of course, on our next gen side, we have some new capabilities there to look at those true, command and control channels, ability to read sensitive data on the device, and then also applying a lot of our unique data set to look not only at security, but at maliciousness. An app might be insecure, but it doesn't mean it's malicious. And an app might be secure and be malicious. So we're also looking at how do we apply through AI, machine learning based approaches, that data set that we have to recognize when an application has malicious intent. So that's something actually we've just completed work on in the research and development phase and are exploring with our customers and how to integrate it into their solution sets. So we provide all this data this capabilities that we have for generated intelligence through a couple of different product lines. So you may be familiar with a few of these. QMAST is for our developers, as we're trying to harden our applications, make sure we're shipping high quality, secure apps. MAST is the tool that allows you to leverage all this core technology to look at your own application. And then primarily QScout is in that IT security. I've got an MDM, but I want it to be smarter to tell me which applications are risky in my environment. That's where QScout comes in. It plugs right into those existing tools for federal agencies and allows you to be alerted of these harvester applications, these privileged applications that are appearing on your network, and it allows you to then remediate also through your MDM. So today, those are the primary technologies here used by the federal government. And we do offer some other product lines that are specialized for specific use cases, like QFirm and QVet as well. So today, we are happy to say that we, are kind of cross-industry, both federal, state, and local, education, different types of government agencies, even global government, like the Singaporean government, New Zealand, UK government, as well as the commercial sector. So these technologies are being used by the people that can't lose. That's what we believe. We want to be protecting people at the front line in the most important environments in the world. So that's where we're operating today, and proud to be a partner as well of US CISA and their mobile app vetting program. So I'm going to stop there, and we can open it up to some questions.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. Audience members, we have a few minutes left. And as Chris mentioned, would like to take this time to answer any outstanding questions. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen. All right. Chris, do you have any additional closing thoughts in the meanwhile?
Yeah, I mean, one other note that I always get asked is from our federal government customers is, how do I, decide, what types of tools I need to protect my mobile environment? And they may already have something like MDM, may already have something like mobile threat defense. But what we're seeing is the applications themselves, as the devices get locked down in terms of the access from work and personal environment, all that stuff. The applications themselves are really becoming the new endpoint that our customers are becoming worried about. So it's no longer just about, hey, I've got an iOS device, I've got an Android device, and I've got protections for those devices. The attention is now shifting towards the applications. And guess what? There's about 80 to 100 applications on each device. So how many endpoints do I really have if I've got 80 times 1,000 or 10,000 devices? So tools that can look into those applications, tell you what data is going where from the application itself, are becoming more and more important. So that's why we believe our technology at Quokka has a great assistance for our federal government customers who are looking at these new and emerging threats coming from the application endpoints.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Chris, for your presentation. I would like to also thank all of you for joining us